ladies. Okay, so today we're in John chapter 2, and we've got two powerful moments happening. We've got the wedding miracle, where he turns water into wine, and we've got the temple cleansing, which is kind of out of order than the other gospels. But these feel really different, but they reveal a couple of things. That Jesus has the power to transform what is empty, and he confronts what is not true. So, starting with the wedding in Cana, Jesus comes to this wedding and he's there with his disciples and his mother, Mary. We can assume that obviously Jesus was invited. We can assume that maybe it's a family friend, something to that effect, because you just don't get invited to a wedding for, if you don't have some kind of connection with these people. And so Mary comes to Jesus and she says they're out of wine. Okay, that's gonna be a major problem. Why? Well, it would cause at minimum social embarrassment in that culture. And some would even say that without wine, if it runs out, then not only is it social embarrassment, but it doesn't bode well for the couple, because they're not going to live in any kind of abundance or blessing. Wine, the fruit of the vine, wine was they didn't look at it the way we look at it now, perhaps, right? It was a blessing. It was good for you. It was living well and prosperous, and it came from the earth, therefore it was given to us by God. So it's looked at it a little bit differently than perhaps it is today. A lot of people will say that back then wine was not the same. It was like grape juice. No, that's incorrect. According to biblical scholars, wine was wine. Now, was it diluted? Yes, for most everyday occasions, because remember, they didn't drink water. Water would have made them sick. Water would unless it had to was boiled or purified, then yes. But on a daily basis, water wasn't necessarily the best thing for them to drink. It was hard to get to. They'd go to the well, but it could make them have all kinds of things that could make them sick. So they really didn't drink a lot of water. They used water, of course, for cleaning and for cleansing and for purifying. But the wine was diluted with purified water. But water is a life source, and they needed it for all kinds of things. So they would dilute some of it so that the wine was diluted. But and the wine didn't intoxicate in the same way. It did, of course, like any other kind of alcoholic beverage. Wine intoxicates. Now, A, on a daily basis, because it's diluted, it's not going to intoxicate so much. But also B, the way it was fermented, because they needed it so often, it didn't ferment as long. So then what makes the intoxication, the alcohol content was a little bit lower, but just by a little bit. You could still get drunk, and many people did. That's the way it is. So along with that, Mary goes up to Jesus and she says, there's no more wine. And she obviously has a heart connection here, I think, because she's concerned about this, and not everybody would know. So Mary somehow is in the know that they're running out of wine. So again, she has some kind of connection to these people in this wedding, more than likely. And she knows the only person who can help in this situation is her son. And she knows what he's capable of, perhaps. There's in different texts and different people have had how do I say this? There were a lot of different writings about Jesus, none that are canonical, meaning that they're not in the Bible, therefore they're not necessarily inspired by God, but there was history, and there were some people who wrote what you could consider like history books sort of thing. some were eyewitnesses, some were not. Some of these were stories passed down, and some of the stories passed down are that Jesus had done miracles. Even as a child, he did small miracles. And so there's obviously some kind. Mary knows what her son can do. He hasn't done any miracles yet while his ministry has began, but perhaps she knows, I don't know, maybe at the table he made water into Kool-Aid. He would have known what Kool-Aid is. I don't know. So that's kind of how we have to think about it, though. Mary understands the implications. She also understands what her son can do. Now, the implications are that, and what he tells her, he says, woman, and this is not in a rude way. It's almost like, Mom. A woman here means like lady. We don't have a translation for that in our culture, but he's like, basically, sweet lady, like, it is not, why are you, I love these, why do you involve me? He's like, why are you bringing this up to me? And then he says, my hour has not yet come. Remember that Jesus, his appointed time to die was set. And he knew divinely the time of appointment. Now, she knows that the dove has descended, and it says, this is my beloved son whom I am well pleased. She knows that he has gone into the wilderness and he has been tempted by Satan. She knows all this. She has a relationship with Jesus as a son. She knows this. So she knows, like, okay, maybe you haven't totally began, but this is a good place to start. What Jesus is saying here, though, is that he's like, I know you know what I can do, and I know you know what I've been called to a point. She doesn't know everything. She is not divine. I think Jesus as a son probably made sure she was, I know he made sure she was cared for, and she knew certain things, but she didn't know everything. Only what a woman and a mother can take, at bits of a time. I'm assuming, but where was I going with that? Oh, when he tells her, it's not my hour, it's not yet come. The reason he's saying this is because their relationship at this moment has changed. More than likely, I'm assuming, as a good Jewish mother, and as a good mother in general, when you have a son who is capable, able, you go to your son and you expect things from him. I need you to take out the trash. Okay, go do that. Hey, there's a problem with this. Can you figure that out? Yes, it's wonderful. That's growing up boys into men. You give them more responsibilities. You have higher expectations for them, so that they can rise to what you're calling them to, right? If we want to grow up lazy men, we don't give them any sort of expectation. The standard is low. If you want to grow up men who are good and who work hard and who, rise to what is being called of them, then you set the expectation high and you push them towards those things. That's what a mother does. And so that's what Mary does. I think that's probably was their relationship. He was a firstborn son. He wants Joseph. We know that at this point, Joseph is not here. He has gone. He's not mentioned ever again. So he has died. Somewhere between the age of 12 and 30, Joseph has passed. We know that Jesus is a carpenter, a tradesman. And so with that, we know that he was taught the job that Joseph had. He was an apprentice under Joseph. And what we can assume is that for all of these years, however long they were, Jesus was apprenticed under Joseph. I'm guessing, assuming that at 13 in Jewish culture, a boy became a man, right? That's when they have their bar mitzvah and all that stuff. And they would begin working under the trade or whatever. Jesus was probably, I'm assuming Jesus went to school because we know at 12, he is being taught in the temple, and he's, amazing the Pharisees and all of these people. I'm assuming that Jesus went to school and continued with his schooling, because there were different levels of schooling for young men. at 12 years old, if they saw a specific ability to learn in you, you would continue on to the Beth Midrash is what it was called. And so it was extra schooling. And you would learn, the entire Bible. You'd have it all memorized. And what I mean by Bible, I mean the scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures. And that would be Genesis all the way to Malachi. Every boy, from the time they entered into the schooling, they knew the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, okay? They would memorize it. They would memorize the law. They would memorize those books, like completely memorized, okay? That was what their schooling entailed of. After 12, they could either continue or they would become apprenticed in some way, shape, or form under probably their father or grandfather, something like that. Jesus, in my mind, and I may be completely wrong about this, but Jesus continued on in schooling, and somewhere in his teen years, and I believe that not only did he continue on in schooling, but he probably was apprenticed under his father, because we know when told that he had he was a carpenter. So, or he was a tradesman, right? And so he had some kind of trade. So Jesus probably, I'm assuming, lost his father probably between 16, 17, had apprenticed under him. Some probably really went into it afterwards because he had to make money for his family. And unfortunately, as a teacher and a rabbi, you don't necessarily make money. So for the years between, let's say, 15, 16 to 30, before he started his ministry, he was at home. These are the silent years. These are the quiet years. And he was at home probably making trades, or not trades, but making carpenting, making things to sell. He had some kind of trade. Some even think that he was in some kind of construction, because that's kind of what, back then, that's kind of what that would yield to, obviously. And he would sell his wares perhaps to make money for the family. It was his responsibility to take care of his mother and to care for her and his brothers and sisters. So all that being said, that was a lot. I don't even know what we're talking about, but all that being said, at this point, oh yes, now I know what we're talking about. At this point, Mary turns to him and she's talking to him as a mother talks to a son. Hey, I need you to fix this. Hey, I need you to rise up and do this. She knows his abilities and she knows he's divine, right? She's known that. But he says his hour hasn't yet come. And he says that because like I said, the relationship has changed. He no longer only, only serves her, or he can't just do what she says. He now, and always has, but everything that is appointed is from the Father. And he has to follow, he's going to follow the appointed times given to him by the Father. And so that's what I mean when the relationship has changed. He's no longer a dutiful son to this woman, the sweet lady here on earth, but he is becoming and is and always was, right? But he's walking in the appointment that the Father has placed upon him. And so therefore that's what he has to depend on and lean into more than ever, because it's leading him to the cross, and it's leading him to different people, and it's leading him to different situations. This is where we see that, and this is what John is trying to show us, is that he is divine. He is the Son of the Father, but he is also human. And there's differentiation, of course, within that in him. So as best as we can kind of understand that, that's kind of what's happening. So my favorite part of this whole story, this whole miracle, there's a couple of things. First, he does what his mother says, because he's like, of course his mother's right. And I'm thinking God is probably up there like, just do what she says. It's fine, But anyways, he turns, there's the 6 purification jugs. They're not jugs. They are huge. They take up rooms, okay? And they're used to they're stone, and so the water's purified in them, and they're used for for the purification of of holy things. We're assuming that they're probably near a synagogue, or and so that's why they have so many. He turns the water turns into wine, and look what's interesting. He tells the servants what to do, and they do it. Jesus doesn't pray over anything. He doesn't, as far as we know, right? He doesn't lay his hands on things. He doesn't speak it. It just becomes. Why? Out of obedience. It's amazing that he allows the servants to take part. Servants. They're the only ones who know what is going on. Have you ever thought about that? They're the only ones who know. They're the one of them had to go to the, to the father probably of whomever and say, hey, there's not enough wine. The fear of that, all of it. It's intense. It's a really big deal. And Jesus goes to the servants, and when Mary says, do whatever he says, okay, just pour water in those. And they do it to the brink. I love that part because they have no idea what to expect. They're probably thinking, okay, what's that going to do? But they're obedient. Maybe in their spirit, they feel, okay, something's different here. So they fill it to the brim, and sure enough, we don't know if it's when it was poured or when we have no idea what the timeline is, but sure enough, it becomes wine. And not just any wine, not diluted wine for everyday use. No, it's the best wine. It's good wine, meaning it tastes good. It is good wine that brings joy, that, does all the things that wine does. So it's pretty amazing on one hand. Miracles happen after obedience sometimes. A lot of times. It's after the obedience. We have to do our part. And again, like I said, that he allows servants to come into it and be a part of it. How incredible is that? So, and then on top of that, what I love about Jesus, because he is just crazy and so fun, he doesn't just make a little bit of wine. Y'all, he makes, according to my calculations, close to 2,800 cups of wine. And we're going to see, and I've said this again and again, God works in the abundance. He works in the abundance. He's not a minimalist God. He's not a God who's like, here's a little bit, that should get you through. If I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it to the abundance. That's the way he works. And it's amazing. And in his first miracle, that's what he does. Now, I can talk about, and I want you to think about how this threads back to Old Testament. First of all, wine. We've got major threads happening with wine. The fact that he makes a miracle that causes joy and celebration, that's pretty amazing. I think that shows the heart of our God. He's a God who celebrates. He's a God who loves us well and cares about things that are important to us. Second, we see the water into wine. And remember what happened when Moses, when he comes into, the fold here, and he goes talks to Pharaoh, and the very first, not miracle, the very first plague was what? Yes, that's correct. It was turning the water into blood. And so Jesus is following in some of these things, but he's doing it like what turned water into blood for punishment and darkness and chaos. Here he turns water into wine for pleasure and celebration and joy, because that's what Jesus has come to do. Where Moses was pulling people out of slavery and to leading them to the promised land, Jesus is also going to pull people out of slavery and lead them into the promised land, or into, heaven and salvation. But that is going to come with, it begins and it ends with joy, celebration, and all of those things. And we're going to see this idea of wine throughout, from the Old Testament all the way to, communion, to the Passover, where now the wine becomes my blood poured out for you. to purify, which is interesting that these pots started with, they're purification pots. And it is that same blood, that same wine that will purify our hearts for eternity. And the next part, he clears the temple courts, and it seems a little off from what we normally see in the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John Gospels. But he's, again, I think John puts it together because it's purifying. He uses water jugs, purified water, basically, to become wine. He will become what purifies us. His blood will purify us. And he clears the temple as an embodiment of him purifying the temple, bringing back what is godly and what is good to what is pure, what is purified, what is truth. And he is who becomes that for us.